Financial literacy isn't about flaunting wealth. It's about knowing when to reveal your cards. Those words from my father echoed in my mind as I sat across from my son-in-law at our family dinner table, watching him lecture me about investment strategies with the smug confidence of someone who believed they were intellectually superior. If only he knew that while he was explaining compound interest to me like I was a child, I was signing off on acquisition papers that would soon make me his boss. Life has a poetic way of teaching humility, doesn't it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I suppose I should start at the beginning. My name is Valencia Reeves. At 58, I've spent 35 years building a financial empire that few people know about. My late husband Arlo and I began with a small inheritance and turned it into a diverse portfolio spanning technology, real estate, and venture capital investments. We operated on a simple principle: remain anonymous, invest wisely, and let the money work silently. We used shell companies, investment groups, and minority stakeholders to mask our involvement. It wasn't about deception. It was about strategy, allowing us to move through business circles without the spotlight following our every decision. When Arlo passed away 7 years ago, I continued our approach, perhaps becoming even more private. Our daughter Meridith grew up understanding wealth differently than most children of affluent families. We lived comfortably in our home in Harborview Heights, but never extravagantly. Meridith attended public schools, worked summer jobs, and earned her own college scholarship. We wanted her to develop integrity, work ethic, and appreciation. Qualities that money can't buy but can easily destroy if handed out too freely. Meridith blossomed into an extraordinary woman, intelligent, compassionate, and fiercely independent. She graduated with honors in environmental engineering and quickly established herself in sustainable architecture. Her innovative designs for energy-efficient buildings caught the attention of several major firms, including Vertex Dynamics, a rapidly expanding tech company specializing in smart building technologies. That's where she met Caden Frost. Caden was everything that initially impressed me: articulate, ambitious, and seemingly brilliant. As Chief Innovation Officer at Vertex, he had pioneered several groundbreaking technologies that merged artificial intelligence with sustainable building practices. Their connection was instant, both passionate about changing the world through green innovation. Within 8 months, they were engaged. Meridith brought Caden home to Harborview Heights for dinner one crisp autumn evening, excitement radiating from her as she introduced the man she loved. Our house, a spacious but understated craftsman with weathered cedar siding and a view of the bay, clearly wasn't what Caden had expected. I caught the slight twitch in his smile as he entered, eyes scanning our modest furnishings with barely concealed surprise. "Your home is so quaint," he remarked, the word dripping with patronizing undertones. "Meridith mentioned you lived in Harborview Heights, so I expected something more." "Ostentatious?" I offered with a smile. "Mom prefers comfort over showiness," Meridith explained, squeezing his arm gently, a silent plea to be more tactful. Caden recovered quickly, expertly shifting into charm mode. "It's refreshing, actually. At Vertex, we're constantly preaching sustainability over excess. I respect the modest approach." Dinner proceeded pleasantly enough. Caden dominated the conversation with animated descriptions of Vertex's latest projects, their rapid expansion into international markets, and his central role in the company's success. I listened attentively, asking occasional questions that he answered with increasing condescension. "The technology is quite complex," he explained after I asked about their recent partnership with a European energy firm. "It involves advanced algorithms that predict energy consumption patterns, probably a bit too technical to get into right now." I simply nodded and passed the potatoes. After dinner, while Meridith helped clear the table, Caden noticed the financial section of the newspaper on my coffee table. You follow the markets? He asked, genuine surprise in his voice. I try to stay informed, I replied. It's important to understand where the world's money is flowing. He chuckled, settling back into the sofa. My mother's the same way. Clips coupons and reads financial headlines thinking it makes her an expert. No offense, but there's a big difference between reading headlines and actually understanding market dynamics. None taken, I said, pouring him more wine. I'm always eager to learn. Perhaps you could enlighten me sometime. That single conversation set the tone for our relationship over the next year. Caden positioned himself as the financial sage, always ready to explain the complexities of the business world to his future mother-in-law, whom he clearly viewed as financially naive. I never corrected him. Sometimes the most powerful position is the one where you're underestimated. As their wedding approached, I noticed troubling patterns in Caden's behavior. His condescension extended beyond financial matters. He began making subtle comments about Meridith's career choices, suggesting that her focus on smaller, community-based projects was limiting her potential. He encouraged her to join Vertex's corporate team instead of maintaining her independent consultancy. You're wasting your talents on local projects when you could be influencing global change under Vertex's umbrella, I overheard him saying one evening. Besides, once we're married, it makes more sense for us to align our professional goals. What particularly concerned me was how Meridith's confident voice grew quieter in his presence. My fiercely independent daughter was slowly being eclipsed by Caden's overwhelming personality and ambition. 3 months before their wedding, Meridith came to me with what she thought was exciting news. Mom, Caden thinks we should sell the Harbor house after the wedding. He says it's a depreciating asset in a stagnating neighborhood. I kept my expression neutral. And what do you think? Well, it makes financial sense, she recited, not meeting my eyes. We'd be combining households anyway, and his condominium in Azure Towers is closer to both our workplaces. This house has been in our family for 3 generations, I reminded her gently. Your father renovated much of it himself. I know, but... She hesitated. Caden says sentimentality is the enemy of sound financial decisions. Caden seems to have opinions about all aspects of our lives, I noted carefully. Meridith's expression hardened slightly. He's just looking out for our future, Mom. He understands things like property values and investment opportunities better than we do. The we pierced my heart. In Caden's narrative, both Meridith and I were financially illiterate women who needed his superior guidance. More troubling was that my daughter had begun to believe it. I decided it was time to learn more about Vertex dynamics and Caden's role there. Over the years, I'd cultivated a network of discreet and thorough researchers who could obtain information without drawing attention. What they discovered was concerning. Vertex was indeed expanding rapidly, but their growth was fueled by increasingly risky financial maneuvers. Their breakthrough technology, the one Caden frequently boasted about pioneering, had several unresolved patent disputes. Most importantly, they were actively seeking major investors for their next expansion phase and struggling to find them. Those who looked closely enough at their books were walking away. More personally disturbing was the pattern that emerged around Caden. He had a history of engaging with women from wealthy families, relationships that mysteriously ended once. He discovered their family assets were either inaccessible to him or not as substantial as he'd believed. His current position at Vertex had been secured through connections from a previous relationship. The final piece of information was what truly decided my course of action. Caden had begun quietly investigating my financial situation, hiring a private researcher to uncover my assets and investment holdings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Fortunately, Arlo and I had built our financial fortress too carefully for such surface-level investigation to penetrate. 2 months before the wedding, I invited Caden to lunch at Harborview Bistro, a small waterfront restaurant with excellent seafood and absolute privacy. He arrived 15 minutes late, barely apologetic, already thumbing through messages on his phone. "Thanks for making time, Valencia," he said, not looking up from his screen. "Things are absolutely crazy at Vertex. Right now, we're finalizing details on a major funding round that's going to revolutionize the company." "That sounds exciting," I replied, sipping my water. "Actually, that's partially why I wanted to meet with you today. I've been thinking about my financial future." That got his attention. His eyes lifted from his phone, suddenly interested. "I've never been particularly savvy with investments," I continued, watching his expression shift into that familiar, patronizing smile. "Arlo handled most of our finances when he was alive, and since then, I've just been maintaining what he left behind." "That's completely understandable," Caden nodded sympathetically. "Financial management can be overwhelming, especially for someone without background in it. What kind of assets did Arlo leave you with? Maybe I can offer some guidance." "Mostly our home and some modest savings," I said vaguely. "But with Meridith getting married, I've been thinking it might be time to make some changes. Perhaps look into more aggressive investment options." Caden leaned forward, eyes alight with sudden purpose. "Valencia, I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear you say that. Frankly, I've been concerned about your financial situation for some time. Property values in Harborview Heights have been stagnant for years, and keeping money in traditional savings these days is basically watching it depreciate." For the next 45 minutes, he explained investment principles to me as if I were a child, occasionally using analogies he deemed simple enough for my understanding. "Think of the stock market like a garden," he explained, reaching for metaphors he thought appropriate for a homemaker. "Different plants need different care, just like different investments need different strategies." I nodded attentively, asking questions that reinforced his perception of me as financially naive. With each question, his confidence grew, and so did his condescension. "What about investing in private companies?" I asked innocently. "I hear that can be quite lucrative." "Absolutely, but it's also extremely risky," he cautioned. "You need to understand the industry, the company's financial health, growth projections. It's not something I'd recommend for beginners." He paused, then added with practiced casualness, "Though, if you're seriously interested in private investment, Vertex is actually accepting a limited number of private investors in our current funding round. Minimum buy-in is substantial, but the projected returns are exceptional." "That sounds intriguing," I replied, "though I'm not sure I'd have enough to meet your minimum investment threshold." "How much were you thinking of investing?" he asked, trying to sound casual while his eyes betrayed his calculations. "I could probably pull together about 2 million, I said, watching his expression carefully. His smile faltered slightly. 2 million was significant, but far less than what he'd clearly hoped for. Still, he recovered quickly. "That's a great starting point. Our minimum buy-in is actually 5 million, but given our relationship, I might be able to convince the board to make an exception." "That's very kind," I said. "Before I make any decisions, though, I'd like to understand more about Vertex's financial situation. Would it be possible to see detailed projections, current valuation, outstanding debts, that sort of thing?" His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though much of that information is confidential. I could prepare a modified investor package that gives you the essential information without revealing proprietary details." "I understand," I said. "In the meantime, could you recommend a good financial advisor? Someone who could help me organize my assets and perhaps suggest other investment opportunities as well?" "Absolutely," he replied, visibly relieved to be steering me away from requesting Vertex's financial details. "I know several excellent advisors who specialize in helping people in your situation." As lunch concluded, Caden insisted on paying, The bill. "Consider it an investment in our future family relationship," he said with a wink. As he signed the receipt with a flourish, he added casually, "By the way, Meridith mentioned you might be thinking of selling the Harbor house after the wedding?" "She told me about your suggestion," I said carefully. "It just makes financial sense," he explained, slipping his credit card back into his wallet. "The house requires constant maintenance. The neighborhood isn't appreciating, and frankly, the property taxes are a drain on fixed income. You could move into something more manageable, perhaps a nice condo in Azure Gardens. There's actually a unit available just 2 floors below ours." His presumption was breathtaking. He'd already selected my next home, conveniently located, where he could easily monitor and influence my decisions. "I'll certainly give it some thought," I replied. The following week, Caden sent over information about 3 financial advisors, all with connections to Vertex and himself, along with a glossy but substance-light investor packet about Vertex's groundbreaking expansion opportunity. The packet was heavy on buzzwords and light on actual financial data. I thanked him politely and told him I'd review everything carefully. In reality, I'd already made my decision. It was time to reveal my cards. Not all of them, but enough to change the dynamics permanently. Through one of my investment groups, I quietly arranged a meeting with Vertex's board of directors, positioning myself as a representative of an anonymous investor interested in their funding round. The meeting was set for their headquarters, in the glass and steel Pinnacle Tower downtown. The evening before this meeting, Caden and Meridith came for dinner at my home. I'd prepared Meridith's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and set the table with the family china we reserved for special occasions. Throughout dinner, Caden dominated the conversation with updates about Vertex's expansion plans, periodically checking his phone for messages from work. "We're meeting with a potential major investor tomorrow," he mentioned between bites. "If it goes well, it could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." "That sounds promising," I said, refilling his wine glass. "What can you tell us about this investor?" "Not much," he admitted. "They're operating through some investment group, keeping their identity confidential. It's frustrating dealing with these secretive types. Usually means they're not serious or they're trying to gather intelligence for competitors. Or perhaps they simply value their privacy," I suggested. He dismissed this with a wave. "In business, transparency builds trust. I've always believed that if you're proud of what you're offering, there's no need to hide behind anonymity." I nearly laughed at the irony, but maintained my composed expression. As we finished dessert, a raspberry cheesecake that Meridith had brought, Caden turned the conversation to wedding preparations, specifically the financial aspects. "Valencia, I've been meaning to discuss something with you," he began, setting down his fork. "I know traditionally the bride's family covers certain wedding expenses, but Meridith mentioned you might be on a tighter budget these days." Meridith looked up sharply. "Caden, I never said—" "It's okay, sweetheart," he interrupted gently. "There's no shame in acknowledging financial limitations. What I was going to suggest," he continued, turning back to me, "is that instead of stretching yourself thin for the wedding, why not use that money as a down payment on a more suitable living arrangement? The Azure Gardens condo I mentioned is still available." "You want my mother to use her wedding contribution to buy a condo?" Meridith asked, her voice rising slightly. "Think about it practically," Caden explained, his tone measured as if explaining to a child. "A lavish wedding lasts one day. A sound investment in appropriate housing provides security for years." "This house is not an inappropriate living arrangement," Meridith said firmly. "It's been in our family for generations." "And it's draining your mother's limited resources every month," Caden countered. "Property taxes, maintenance, utilities. For spaces she rarely uses. It's financially irresponsible." I set down my coffee cup with a deliberate softness. "Caden, your concern for my financial welfare is touching, but perhaps misplaced." "Valencia," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. I understand this is difficult to hear. Many people from your generation weren't taught proper financial management. There's no shame in that. But part of my responsibility as Meridith's future husband is ensuring both of you are making sound financial decisions. Is that so? I asked quietly. Absolutely. Financial literacy isn't just about managing money. It's about understanding the true value of assets and making objective rather than emotional decisions. I smiled slightly. And in your expert assessment, I lack this literacy? I wouldn't put it that harshly, he backpedaled slightly, but I think it's fair to say you could benefit from more sophisticated financial guidance. Mom, Meridith interrupted, clearly uncomfortable, you don't have to justify anything. This house is yours, and what you do with it is your decision alone. Caden sighed dramatically. This is exactly what I'm talking about, emotional rather than rational decision-making. Your mother is living in a house 3 times larger than she needs, in a neighborhood that's financially stagnant, while struggling to make ends meet. How does that make sense? What makes you think I'm struggling? I asked calmly. It's obvious, he stated bluntly. The outdated kitchen appliances, the furnishings that haven't been updated in a decade, driving the same car for 15 years. There's no shame in it, but pretending there's no financial strain isn't helpful. I looked at my daughter, whose face had flushed with embarrassment and anger. She opened her mouth to defend me, but I gently placed my hand over hers. Caden, I said, my voice perfectly steady. I appreciate your concern, misguided though it may be, but I think it's time we clarified something important. I paused, meeting his gaze directly. I don't discuss my finances publicly because I don't measure my worth by my bank account, not because there's anything lacking. The choice to live simply was exactly that, a choice. He offered a patronizing smile. Valencia, there's no need to be defensive. We're family now. Indeed, I agreed. Which is why I'm going to give you some advice. Tomorrow, when you meet with your potential investor, I suggest you be exceptionally well prepared. Review the patent disputes on your flagship, technology. Examine the discrepancies in your third-quarter projections, and perhaps reconsider your stance on anonymity in business relationships. His expression froze, the smile still fixed on his face, but his eyes suddenly wary. What exactly are you saying? Simply that transparency builds trust, I replied, echoing his own words. And tomorrow I expect complete transparency from Vertex Dynamics. The color drained from his face as understanding dawned. You're the potential investor? Not quite, I corrected him. I represent Aurora Capital Partners, which is considering a significant position in Vertex. Of course, given our personal connection, I'll need to disclose this potential conflict of interest to my associates. Your associates? He repeated, his voice faint. I smiled. Perhaps we should have discussed our respective financial literacies more thoroughly. It might have saved us both some time. The next morning dawned with a crystalline clarity that belied the tension building inside me. I dressed with purpose, a charcoal Armani suit I'd purchased years ago but rarely worn, pearl earrings Arlo had given me on our 20th anniversary, and my grandmother's vintage Cartier watch. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth, but everything that whispered quiet confidence. The board meeting wasn't until 10 a.m., but I arrived at Pinnacle Tower by 8:30, using the extra time to center myself in the building's austere lobby cafe. Caden had left our dinner table last night visibly shaken. His immediate reaction had been disbelief, followed by a poorly concealed panic. He'd made 3 phone calls before even leaving my driveway, his voice carrying through the open car window as he barked orders at some unfortunate subordinate to pull together all the documentation and make sure the projections look solid. Meridith had stayed behind, her expression a complex mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "Mom," she'd said once we were alone, What exactly is Aurora Capital Partners? I had sighed, pouring us both a nightcap of Arlo's favorite whiskey. It's one of my investment firms. Your father and I established it about 20 years ago, named after the northern lights we saw on our honeymoon in Norway. One of your investment firms? She repeated, accepting the crystal tumbler with a slightly trembling hand. How many do you have? 11 active ones, I replied, settling into my favorite armchair. Some are specialized for different sectors: technology, real estate, biomedical. Others are structured for different types of investments: venture capital, private equity, long-term holdings. She took a long sip, wincing slightly at the burn. All this time when Caden was patronizing you about investment strategies, I was managing a portfolio worth considerably more than Vertex's entire market valuation. I finished for her. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice held no accusation, just genuine bewilderment. I considered my answer carefully. Your father and I always wanted you to develop your own path, free from the expectations that often come with family wealth. We've seen too many children of affluent families lose their way, their sense of purpose. When you threw yourself into environmental engineering, passionate about making a real difference in the world, we knew we'd made the right choice. But Caden, she began, then faltered. Caden saw what he wanted to see, I said gently. A naive widow living beyond her means in a family home she couldn't afford to maintain. He never bothered to look deeper. Now, sitting in the sleek lobby cafe of Pinnacle Tower, I reviewed my notes one final time. Aurora Capital Partners wasn't just considering an investment in Vertex. We already owned a significant minority stake through a series of shell companies and proxies. What the board didn't know, what Caden certainly didn't know, was that I was considering increasing that stake to a controlling interest. The company had potential, despite its current leadership's questionable decisions. At precisely 9:55, I stepped into the elevator that would carry me to the 47th floor executive suite. As the doors were about to close, a hand shot between them, forcing them back open. Caden stood there, immaculately dressed, but with shadows under his eyes suggesting a sleepless night. For a moment, he didn't recognize me, his gaze sliding past before snapping back with sudden recognition. Valencia, he said, his voice straining for normalcy as he stepped into the elevator. I didn't expect to see you so early. Professional courtesy, I replied simply. I believe in being punctual. The elevator began its smooth ascent, filling with uncomfortable silence. Caden shifted his weight repeatedly, adjusting his tie, checking his watch. I remained still, watching the floor numbers climb steadily higher. About last night, he finally began, his voice carefully modulated. I think there may have been some misunderstandings. Oh? I kept my response deliberately brief, forcing him to fill the silence. My comments about your financial situation, they came from a place of concern, not judgment. I hope you know that. Of course, I said, my tone neutral. Just as my comments about Vertex's patent disputes came from a place of due diligence, not criticism. His jaw tightened visibly. How exactly did you learn about those disputes? That information isn't public. Proper research is the foundation of sound investment, I replied, using his own condescending teaching tone. Wouldn't you agree? The elevator chimed softly as we reached the 47th floor. The doors parted to reveal a reception area of gleaming marble and brushed steel, dominated by Vertex's distinctive triangular logo. Valencia, Caden said urgently as I stepped forward. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before the meeting. I'm sure we can reach an understanding that benefits everyone. I turned to face him, maintaining a professional smile. We'll have plenty of time to discuss everything in the boardroom with all the relevant parties present. Transparency builds trust, after all. The receptionist recognized Caden immediately, her professional smile faltering slightly as she noted, his obvious discomfort. "Good morning, Mr. Frost. The board is assembled in the main conference room. They're waiting for you and the—" She glanced at me uncertainly. "The investor representative." "Thank you," I replied smoothly. "Valencia Reeves, Aurora Capital." "Partners." Her eyes widened slightly at the name before she regained her composure. "Of course, Ms. Reeves. Right this way, please." She led us down a corridor lined with awards and press mentions, each celebrating Vertex's innovations and Kaiden's visionary leadership. I noted with interest that several of these accolades referenced the very technology now embroiled in patent disputes. The boardroom doors swung open to reveal a long table surrounded by 8 men and 2 women, all in dark suits projecting carefully cultivated authority. At the head sat Ellis Chambers, Vertex's founder and chairman, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He rose as we entered. "Mr. Frost," he acknowledged Kaiden with a nod, before turning his attention to me. "And you must be the representative from Aurora Capital. Welcome to Vertex Dynamics." "Valencia Reeves," I introduced myself, extending my hand. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting." Recognition flickered across his face at my name, though he masked it quickly. "Of course. We're eager to discuss potential partnership opportunities. Please, have a seat." I chose a chair midway down the table, directly across from where Kaiden settled. The board members introduced themselves one by one: Chief Financial Officer, Chief Technology Officer, heads of various divisions. I acknowledged each with a polite nod, mentally matching names with the extensive research my team had compiled. "Now then," Chambers began once the formalities concluded, "I understand Aurora Capital is interested in our current funding round. We've prepared a comprehensive presentation on Vertex's market position, growth trajectory, and expansion plans." He nodded to his assistant, who dimmed the lights as a sleek, animated presentation appeared on the wall screen. What followed was a masterfully crafted narrative of innovation, market disruption, and unlimited potential, all anchored by their flagship smart building technology. Throughout the presentation, I remained attentive but neutral, occasionally making notes. Kaiden, meanwhile, kept glancing in my direction, clearly trying to gauge my reaction. When the lights came back up, Chambers turned to me with practiced confidence. "As you can see, Ms. Reeves, Vertex is positioned at the forefront of sustainable technology innovation. Our proprietary systems reduce energy consumption by 47%, while increasing efficiency across all building operations. Our current valuation of $2.8 billion is projected to double within 18 months as we expand into international markets." I closed my notebook deliberately. "Very impressive, Mr. Chambers. The presentation was quite compelling." The tension in the room eased slightly at my positive response. "However," I continued, "I do have some questions about aspects not covered in your overview." Kaiden straightened in his chair, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his pen. "Of course," Chambers said smoothly. "We're happy to address any areas requiring clarification." "Let's start with the patent situation," I said, my tone conversational but direct. "Specifically, the disputes with GreenSphere Technologies and next-gen building systems regarding your core technology platform." A palpable shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. Several board members exchanged glances while the CFO hurriedly shuffled through his papers. "I'm not sure what you've heard," Chambers replied carefully, "but those are minor procedural challenges, not serious disputes. Common in our industry when breakthrough innovations disrupt established patterns." "I see," I nodded, removing a folder from my briefcase. "So the cease and desist order filed by GreenSphere last month, which specifically prohibits Vertex from implementing the neural network component of your system in any new installations pending resolution, would qualify as minor?" The CFO cleared his throat. "That order applies to a very specific technical element, not our entire system. Our legal team is confident it will be resolved in our favor within 6 to 8 weeks. I finished for him. Yes, that's what they've been saying for the past 7 months, according to the case filings. Caden finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled panic. These technical and legal details, while important, don't fundamentally change Vertex's value proposition or market position. On the contrary, I countered, opening my folder to reveal meticulously organized documents. These details directly impact your ability to deliver on the contracts you've already signed with Meridian Properties and the Takahashi Group. Without the neural network component, your system's efficiency drops from the advertised 47% to a much less impressive 23%, barely better than your competitors' standard offerings. Stunned silence fell over the room. Chambers recovered first, his expression hardening. Ms. Reeves, I'm not sure where you obtained this information, but public court records, internal memos that were attached as exhibits, and direct conversations with your former chief patent counsel, who left rather abruptly 3 months ago. I met his gaze steadily. Mr. Chambers, Aurora Capital doesn't make uninformed investments. We do our homework. The CFO leaned forward, his face ashen. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I replied calmly. I'm stating facts that seem notably absent from your presentation. Facts that materially affect Vertex's current operations and future prospects. Facts that any serious investor would expect to be disclosed up front, not discovered through independent investigation. Caden's face had gone completely white. He knew better than anyone how this looked, not just professional oversight, but deliberate concealment of information that would significantly impact investment decisions. Chambers' jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke again. Ms. Reeves, perhaps we should adjourn briefly to discuss these concerns in a smaller group. I assure you, there are explanations for each point you've raised. I'm sure there are, I agreed, and I look forward to hearing them. But first, I think we should address the other elephant in the room. I turned my gaze directly to Caden. The potential conflict of interest. Every head at the table swiveled toward Caden, whose expression flickered between confusion and alarm. Mr. Frost is engaged to my daughter, I explained to the board, a personal connection that normally would require disclosure and recusal from negotiations of this nature. I was going to mention that, Caden stammered. Once preliminary discussions had established mutual interest. Were you? I asked mildly. Just as you were planning to mention it to me when you suggested I invest my modest savings in Vertex through you? Or when you insisted my family home was a financial drain I couldn't afford? Chambers' eyes narrowed dangerously. Mr. Frost? Is this accurate? Caden's throat worked visibly. There's been a misunderstanding. Ms. Reeves and I had discussed potential personal investments, yes, but not in any official capacity. It was family conversation, not a business solicitation. I see, I replied, removing another document from my folder. Then perhaps you could explain this email, sent from your Vertex account 3 days ago, where you offer to facilitate a private investment opportunity for me with modified terms that bypass standard investment protocols. That would seem to contradict both company policy and securities regulations regarding preferential treatment and disclosure. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The board members' expressions ranged from shock to fury to calculation. Mr. Frost, the CFO said in a carefully controlled voice, is there something you need to tell this board? Caden looked trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. I was simply trying to help family navigate a complex investment landscape. Nothing improper was intended. And yet, I noted, according to this email chain, you specifically instructed your assistant to prepare modified documents that omitted mention of the patent disputes and ongoing litigation. Documents intended for family use only. Chambers stood abruptly. Ms. Reeves, the board needs to confer privately. Would you mind stepping out for a few minutes? Not at all, I replied, gathering my materials. Take all the time you need. I'll wait in the reception area. As I rose to leave, Caden's expression had transformed from panic to something darker, a mixture of humiliation and fury directed squarely at me. I met his gaze evenly before turning away. The next 45 minutes in the reception area were peaceful. I used the time to answer emails and review updates from my other investment teams. Eventually, the boardroom door opened, and Ellis Chambers himself appeared. Ms. Reeves, would you join us again? His tone had shifted noticeably, less commanding, more conciliatory. I followed him back to the boardroom, where the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Caden was no longer at the table. The remaining board members looked somber, their earlier confidence replaced by cautious pragmatism. We appreciate your patience, Chambers began once I was seated, and your thoroughness. The board has discussed the issues you raised, and we acknowledge that our presentation failed to adequately address certain challenges facing Vertex at this time. I'm glad to hear that, I replied. Transparency is essential for productive partnership. Yes, he agreed, a hint of irony in his tone. We've also addressed the conflict of interest situation. Mr. Frost has been temporarily relieved of his duties pending a full review of his communications and actions regarding potential investors. I nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. That said, Chambers leaned forward. We're still very interested in Aurora Capital's potential investment. Perhaps we could reschedule a more comprehensive presentation that addresses all your concerns directly? That won't be necessary, I said, removing a final document from my briefcase. Aurora Capital isn't interested in making a new investment in Vertex Dynamics. I slid the document across the table. We're interested in consolidating our existing 1. Chambers frowned, picking up the paper. His eyes widened as he read, his usual composure cracking. This says Aurora Capital already owns 17% of Vertex through subsidiary holdings. Correct, I confirmed. Through various investment vehicles established over the past 18 months. What we're proposing now is increasing that position to 51% through a direct purchase of controlling interest. And the CFO snatched the document from Chambers, scanning it frantically. This is impossible. We track all significant shareholders. These companies listed here, Trinity Ventures, Blackwell Holdings, Meridian Capital, they're completely separate entities with different management teams. All ultimately reporting to Aurora's executive board, I explained. Of which I am chairperson. The room erupted into controlled chaos, hushed urgent conversations, frantic paper shuffling, shocked expressions. Chambers raised a hand for silence, studying me with new eyes. You've been planning this for over a year, he said, realization dawning, long before your daughter became involved with Caden Frost. Aurora began acquiring positions in promising green technology companies 3 years ago, I corrected. Vertex was one of 17 initial investments. Your technology has genuine potential, despite the current leadership's questionable decisions and disclosure practices. And now you want control, he stated flatly. We want proper management, I countered. Vertex has brilliant engineers, innovative designs, and a market hungry for your solutions. What you lack is transparent leadership and ethical governance. Aurora can provide that, along with the capital necessary to resolve your patent issues legally rather than through evasion. Chambers leaned back, his expression calculating. And if we refuse? Then we remain a significant minority shareholder, with all the rights that entails, including the right to call for shareholder votes on management practices, disclosure policies, and leadership changes. I smiled slightly. But I don't think it will come to that. My offer is fair, 20% above current market valuation, despite the undisclosed challenges. More importantly, it provides Vertex with the stability and credibility it needs to overcome its current difficulties. The board members exchanged glances, a series of unspoken communications passing between them. Finally, Chambers sighed. "We'll need time to consider this proposal formally." "Of course," I agreed, rising from my seat. "You have my contact information. I look forward to hearing your decision." As I gathered my belongings, the youngest board member, Dr. Lena Novak, head of research and development, approached me. "The neural network cooling system," she said quietly. "That was actually my design originally. I've been arguing for months that we should settle with GreenSphere and acknowledge their prior patent. Their implementation is different enough that we could both succeed in the market without this legal quagmire." I studied her thoughtfully. "And why hasn't that happened?" She glanced toward Chambers, then back to me. "Ego, mostly. And the fear that acknowledging any external contribution would undermine our disruptive innovator market narrative." "I see," I nodded. "Dr. Novak, if Aurora's proposal is accepted, I'd be very interested in hearing more of your perspective on Vertex's technical direction." Her eyes lit up. "I'd welcome that conversation, Ms. Reeves." As I left the boardroom, I felt multiple gazes following me, some calculating, some concerned, all reassessing everything they thought they knew about Aurora Capital and Valencia Reeves. In the elevator descending to the lobby, I finally checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Caden, 5 from Meridith, and 1 text message from my daughter. "He came to the house. We need to talk." My stomach tightened. I'd expected Caden to react poorly, but I hadn't anticipated him seeking out Meridith so quickly. The elevator doors opened, and I quickened my pace through the lobby, dialing my daughter's number as I walked. She answered on the first ring. "Mom?" "I'm on my way," I said immediately. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady but tight. "Caden's still here. You should know, he's not taking this well." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promised, pushing through the revolving doors into the bright morning sunshine. The drive to Meridith's downtown apartment was tense, my mind racing through possibilities. Had Caden simply gone to complain, to try to enlist her as an ally against me? Or was there a more troubling agenda? My daughter was strong-willed and intelligent, but she had also shown a concerning tendency to accommodate Caden's controlling behavior. I found a parking space half a block from her building and hurried to the entrance, using the key she'd given me months ago to access the private elevator. As the doors opened on her floor, I could already hear raised voices from her apartment. "You can't possibly believe this was coincidental!" Caden's voice, strained and angry. "She's been playing us both, manipulating everything from the shadows like some puppet master." "Lower your voice," Meridith responded, her tone impressively calm. "My neighbors don't need to hear your conspiracy theories." "Conspiracy?" He laughed bitterly. "Your mother just destroyed my career. The board suspended me pending an ethics investigation. Do you have any idea what that means in this industry? I'll be toxic, unemployable." I knocked firmly on the door. The voices inside immediately silenced. After a moment, Meridith opened the door, her face composed, but her eyes reflecting relief at seeing me. "Mom, come in." The apartment's spacious. Living room felt cramped with tension. Caden stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back rigid, hands clenched at his sides. He didn't turn when I entered. "Caden came to discuss this morning's board meeting," Meridith explained unnecessarily. "He has some concerns about your involvement." "I imagine he does," I replied evenly, setting my purse down on the kitchen counter. Caden finally turned, his handsome features distorted by fury. "Did you enjoy it? Humiliating me in front of the entire board? Was that your plan all along?" "I attended a business meeting representing my investment firm's interests," I replied calmly. "Any humiliation you experienced was self-inflicted, the natural consequence of your own deception." "Deception?" he spat. "That's rich coming." From the woman who pretended to be a financially illiterate widow while secretly controlling a business empire. I never claimed to be financially illiterate, I corrected him. You assumed it, based on your own biases and preconceptions. Not once did I misrepresent myself or my circumstances. You deliberately misled me by not correcting your misconceptions, by allowing you to underestimate me. I shook my head. Caden, from the moment you met me, you've spoken to me with condescension, explaining basic financial concepts as if I were a child, dismissing my home as a burden I couldn't afford, suggesting I move into a more appropriate condo under your supervision. At any point, you could have asked genuine questions about my background, my experience, my financial situation. Instead, you made assumptions that confirmed your pre-existing narrative. Mom, Meridith interrupted softly, maybe we should all sit down and discuss this calmly. There's nothing to discuss, Caden snapped. Your mother has been spying on me, investigating me, undermining me. Evaluating a potential investment, I corrected. Aurora Capital began acquiring positions in Vertex 18 months ago, long before you met my daughter. Our interest in the company has always been purely business, until you made it personal by trying to manipulate me into an improper investment while concealing material information. You never told me, he said, turning to Meridith accusingly. You let me believe your family was struggling financially. Meridith shook her head. I never said that. You assumed it, and I didn't contradict you. I was raised not to discuss family finances unnecessarily. Convenient, he sneered. So you both just sat back and watched me make a fool of myself? Caden, I said firmly, this victim narrative isn't productive. You attempted to leverage a personal relationship for financial gain. You deliberately withheld critical information about Vertex's legal challenges. You suggested investment terms that violated securities regulations. These are your actions, not ours. He stared at me, jaw working soundlessly for a moment before finally managing, You've destroyed everything. My position at Vertex, my reputation in the industry. Your position was already at risk, I interrupted. The patent disputes you've been concealing threatened the company's entire foundation. The board would have discovered the truth eventually, with or without my involvement. You don't understand, he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. Without my position at Vertex, I lose everything. My condo has a massive mortgage, my car payments. The lifestyle you leveraged to impress my daughter, I finished for him. Yes, I'm aware of your financial situation. That's part of proper due diligence when evaluating leadership competency. He flinched as if struck, then turned to Meridith, his tone suddenly softening. Mary, you have to see what's happening here. She's trying to control everything, just like she's probably controlled you your entire life. We can't let her dictate our future together. Meridith's expression hardened. Our future together? Caden, you've spent the last hour raging about how my mother ruined your career and your life. You've called me complicit in some elaborate deception because I didn't volunteer information about my family's finances, information that was never your business in the first place. And now you're suggesting we have a future together? You're upset. I understand that, he said, reaching for her hand. But we can work through this. Once we're married. She withdrew her hand from his reach. We're not getting married. What? The single word emerged, strangled. I've been watching you these past few months, making little comments about my career choices, suggesting I join Vertex instead of pursuing my independent projects, critiquing my spending habits, pressuring my mother to sell her home. She shook, her head slowly. I told myself you were just being practical, looking out for our best interests. But today, seeing your reaction, this rage, this entitlement, I finally understand what I've been ignoring. This is your mother's influence, he accused, desperation edging his voice. She's turning you against me. No, Caden. You did that yourself. Meridith slipped the engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the coffee table between them. Please leave. We have nothing more to discuss. For a moment, he simply stared at the ring, disbelief etched across his features. Then his gaze hardened as he turned back to me. This isn't over. Aurora may think it can take over Vertex, but I still have allies on the board, investors who trust me. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But they trusted Caden Frost, visionary leader and innovator, not Caden Frost, suspended executive under ethics investigation. Will they still support you when they learn about the doctored documents you provided to potential investors? The material information you withheld? The personal relationship you leveraged for financial advantage? His face contorted with fury, but he had no effective counter. With a final venomous glare, he snatched the ring from the table and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the artwork on Meridith's walls. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Meridith sank onto her sofa, exhaling slowly as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Are you all right?" I asked gently, joining her. She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed, a small, slightly broken sound. "I don't know. I feel like I've been living in some alternate reality these past few months. Everything I thought I knew about him, about us, was constructed on his terms, through his lens." I remained silent, giving her space to process. "You knew," she said finally. "You saw through him from the beginning, didn't you?" "I had concerns," I admitted. "But I wanted to respect your choices, your independence. You're an intelligent woman capable of making your own decisions." "Even when those decisions were clearly mistakes?" I smiled sadly. "Especially then. Sometimes the most important lessons come from our most painful choices." She leaned against my shoulder, a gesture reminiscent of her childhood. "What happens now? With Vertex, I mean." "That depends on the board," I replied. "They have until tomorrow to consider Aurora's offer. Based on their reaction today, I suspect they'll accept. Vertex has genuine potential if properly managed. And Caden?" I sighed. "His future is his own responsibility. The board may reinstate him after their investigation, though in a reduced capacity. More likely, they'll negotiate a severance package contingent on his discretion and cooperation." "He won't go quietly," she warned. "You saw him just now. He's furious, humiliated." "Yes," I agreed, which is precisely why Aurora's legal team is already preparing for potential countermeasures. If he attempts to retaliate against Vertex, against Aurora, or against either of us personally, he'll find himself facing legal consequences far more damaging than professional embarrassment." Meridith was quiet for a long moment, digesting this. "All those years," she finally said, "you and Dad building this empire. Why did you keep it hidden from me?" "Not hidden," I corrected gently. "Just not emphasized. We wanted you to develop your own identity, your own values, without the weight of family wealth defining you before you could define yourself." I smiled wryly. "Perhaps we were too successful." "What do you mean?" "Your independence, your determination to make your own way, they're admirable qualities that Arlo and I always encouraged, but they also made you vulnerable to someone like Caden, who recognized that drive and twisted it to serve his own agenda." She frowned. "Are you saying this is my fault?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Caden's manipulative behavior is entirely his responsibility. I'm simply acknowledging that we might have better prepared you to recognize such manipulation if we'd been more transparent about certain realities." My phone buzzed with an incoming message. I glanced at the screen to see Ellis Chambers' name. "The board is requesting a follow-up meeting tomorrow morning," I noted, reading his message. "It seems they're eager to continue our discussion." "They'll accept your offer," Meridith predicted. They'd be fools not to. I nodded, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Likely, but that's tomorrow's concern. Right now, I'm more interested in you. How are you really feeling? She considered the question seriously. Relieved, actually. Like I've been carrying this weight I didn't even recognize until it was gone. She looked up at me, her eyes clearer than they'd been in months. Thank you. Not just for today, but for letting me make my own mistakes. For trusting me to find my way back. I squeezed her hand gently. That's what mothers do. We provide roots so you can grow and wings so you can fly, even if that sometimes means watching you stumble before finding your balance. Well, she said with a small smile, I think I've had enough stumbling for a while. As the afternoon light filled her apartment, we began discussing practical matters, the wedding cancellation, returning gifts, notifying friends and family. Throughout it all, Meridith's voice grew progressively stronger, more decisive. The shadow that had gradually dimmed her natural confidence during her relationship with Caden was lifting, revealing once again the remarkable woman she had always been. Later, as we shared a quiet dinner at her favorite neighborhood restaurant, Meridith looked up from her meal with sudden curiosity. Those other companies you mentioned, Trinity Ventures, Blackwell Holdings, are they all named after family connections? I smiled, pleased by her perception. Yes. Trinity was your grandmother's. Middle name. Blackwell was your father's mother's family. And Meridian Capital? She asked, eyes narrowing. Named after me? Your father insisted, I admitted. He established it the year you were born, saying it would someday be your legacy if you wanted it. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. All these years, I thought I was forging my own path completely independently. But you and Dad were there all along, creating this foundation I never even knew existed. Does that bother you? I asked carefully. She considered the question, then slowly shook her head. No, it's like discovering a safety net I never knew was there. Not because I needed saving, but because I was loved. She raised her glass in a small toast. To financial literacy, the kind that comes with wisdom, not just knowledge. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a deep sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The board meeting, Vertex's transition, potential fallout, from Caden's resentment. But tonight, watching my daughter reclaim her confidence and clarity, I knew we would face whatever came next with the strength that had always defined our family. Not the strength of wealth or power, but the quiet resilience that comes from knowing exactly who you are and having the wisdom to recognize when others don't see you clearly. Ellis Chambers called early the next morning. The crisp tone of his voice confirmed what I had already anticipated. The board has reviewed your proposal and would like to move forward. We've drafted a preliminary agreement that addresses your key concerns while protecting existing shareholder interests. I'm pleased to hear that, I replied, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across my kitchen window. My legal team will review the documents as soon as you send them over. There is one additional matter, Chambers continued, his voice taking on a more hesitant quality. Regarding Caden Frost. I set down my coffee cup. Yes? He's submitted a formal grievance against the company and against you personally. He's alleging targeted harassment, conflict of interest violations, and breach of confidentiality agreements. I see, I said, unsurprised but disappointed nonetheless. Does he have any substantive evidence for these claims? Nothing that would withstand scrutiny, Chambers admitted. It appears to be a pressure tactic, perhaps hoping for a more generous severance package. However, his attorney is suggesting they might pursue more public channels if their concerns aren't addressed. Attempting to create embarrassing headlines to force a settlement, I translated. A fairly standard approach when one lacks legitimate grounds for complaint. Precisely, Chambers agreed. Under normal circumstances, we'd handle this internally, through our legal department. But given Aurora's pending acquisition and your personal connection to the situation, you're concerned about complications, I finished for him. That's prudent. I'll have my team coordinate with yours to develop an appropriate response strategy. In the meantime, please proceed with the acquisition paperwork as planned. We shouldn't allow Mr. Frost's tactics to derail the broader business objectives. After ending the call, I sat quietly, considering the implications. Caden's reaction was predictable, a wounded ego lashing out with whatever weapons it could grasp. What concerned me more was how this might affect Meridith. She had already endured one public scene at her workplace. Another, potentially more damaging confrontation could impact her professional standing, regardless of its lack of merit. I dialed my attorney, Elise Harrington, who answered despite the early hour. After explaining the situation, I asked her to assemble a specialized team to address Caden's threats while minimizing potential collateral damage to Meridith. We should meet with Meridith today, Elise advised. She needs to be prepared for what might come next, especially if he attempts to use her as leverage in negotiations. I agreed, then called my daughter. As expected, she was already awake. Probably had been for hours, knowing her tendency to process emotional upheaval by throwing herself into work. Caden's filed grievances, I told her without preamble. Against Vertex and against me personally. A beat of silence followed, then a soft exhale. I was afraid of that. What's he claiming? The usual deflections, harassment, unfair targeting, confidentiality breaches. Nothing substantive, according to Chambers, but potentially messy if he decides to make it public. Which he will, Meridith concluded grimly. He won't be able to resist the temptation to control the narrative. My thoughts exactly. Elise suggests we meet today to prepare for various scenarios. Are you free for lunch at Harrington offices? I'll rearrange my schedule, she promised. Mom, I'm sorry about this. Don't apologize for his actions, I said firmly. None of this reflects on you. We agreed to meet at noon, and I spent the intervening hours reviewing the preliminary acquisition agreement Chambers had sent over. It was largely standard, though with additional clauses addressing the patent disputes that had been central to my concerns. By 11:30, I had compiled a detailed list of modifications and clarifications. For my legal team, Harrington and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a sleek downtown building, their reception area a careful balance of welcoming warmth and understated professionalism. Meridith arrived moments after I did, wearing a sharply tailored suit that projected confidence despite the shadows beneath her eyes. Elise Harrington greeted us personally, ushering us into a comfortable conference room where lunch had already been arranged. At 52, Elise projected the calm authority that came from decades navigating complex legal challenges. She had been my trusted advisor since Arlo's death, helping me maintain and expand the financial structures he and I had built together. Let's start with what we know, Elise began once we were settled. Caden Frost has filed formal grievances alleging improper conduct in the process of Aurora's acquisition of Vertex. He's being represented by Thornton Blackwell, who specializes in leveraging public opinion to force favorable settlements. How worried should we be? Meridith asked directly. Elise considered the question. On legal grounds, minimally concerned. His claims are substantively weak and easily refuted. On public relations grounds, moderately concerned. Blackwell is skilled at crafting narratives that, while ultimately unsustainable in court, can create temporary public relations challenges. What's his most likely approach? I asked. Based on his previous cases, he'll attempt to position Caden as a visionary leader being unfairly ousted by a manipulative investor with personal motivations. Elise tapped her tablet, bringing up a document. He'll emphasize the mother-daughter relationship, suggesting Aurora's investment was specifically targeted to undermine Kaiden rather than based on legitimate business considerations. But Aurora began investing in Vertex long before I even met Kaiden, Meridith pointed out. Exactly, Elise nodded. Which is one of many factual problems with his narrative. However, Blackwell operates on the principle that a sensational headline travels faster than its subsequent correction. So we need to get ahead of the narrative, I concluded. Precisely. Elise slid a folder across the table. We've prepared several scenarios with corresponding response strategies. The key is ensuring that any public statement is backed by incontrovertible documentation that directly contradicts whatever claims Blackwell might make. We spent the next hour reviewing potential scenarios and refining response strategies. Elise's team had been thorough, anticipating angles ranging from business disputes to personal accusations. By the time we finished lunch, we had a clear plan for addressing whatever approach Kaiden and his attorney might take. There's one more thing, Elise said as we prepared to leave. We should discuss the possibility of a preemptive disclosure. What would that entail? Meridith asked. Aurora issuing a statement announcing the acquisition and acknowledging the personal connection, but framing it appropriately within the business context. It wouldn't prevent Blackwell from pursuing his strategy, but it would establish the factual foundation before he can introduce distortions. I considered this carefully. Draft the statement, but hold it in reserve. I'd prefer to see their opening move before we commit to a specific public position. Understood, Elise nodded. We'll have it ready to deploy if necessary. We parted, ways with a renewed sense of preparedness, though the necessity of such preparations left a bitter taste. As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, Meridith stared at her reflection in the polished doors. I keep thinking about all the warning signs I ignored, she said quietly. The little comments about my career choices, the constant suggestions that I wasn't being strategic enough with my projects. He made me question my own judgment so subtly, I didn't even notice it happening. That's how manipulation works, I replied gently. It's incremental, each step so small it seems reasonable. In isolation. Only when you step back can you see the pattern. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, but Meridith remained still for a moment. I'm not going to let him define the narrative of my life, not the personal one, and certainly not a public one. Her determination was palpable, and I felt a surge of pride as we walked together toward the building's exit. We had just reached the revolving doors when my phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Dr. Lena Novak, Vertex's head of research and development. Have you seen the company-wide email? The message read. Kaiden's making his move. I showed the message to Meridith, who immediately pulled out her own phone and began searching for news. Nothing public yet, she reported. Must be internal for now. Let's find out exactly what we're dealing with, I suggested, guiding her toward a quiet corner of the lobby. I called Lena directly, who answered immediately. Ms. Reeves, I thought you should know. Frost sent an all-staff email about 20 minutes ago. He's claiming he was forced out because he opposed selling to Aurora, which he describes as a predatory investment firm with a personal vendetta against him. What's been the internal response? I asked. Mixed, Lena admitted. Most of the technical teams know there's more to the story, especially those of us who've been dealing with the patent issues he kept downplaying. But he has loyalists in marketing and business development who are taking his claims at face value. Is Chambers addressing it? He's called an emergency all-hands meeting for 3 o'clock. I thought you might want to know beforehand. I thanked her for the heads-up and ended the call, turning to Meridith. It seems Kaiden is starting with an internal campaign before taking things public. My daughter's expression hardened. Classic strategy. Consolidate your base before expanding the battlefield. Exactly, I agreed. And it gives us a clearer picture of the narrative he's constructing. Before we could discuss further, my phone rang again. Ellis Chambers this time. Valencia. I assume you've heard about Frost's email? Just now, yes. Dr. Novak was kind, enough to alert me. "This complicates our announcement plans," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "We were hoping to position the acquisition as a positive development for all stakeholders, but Frost is already poisoning the well." "It's not unexpected," I replied calmly, "and it might actually work to our advantage." "How so?" "By showing his hand early, he's given us the opportunity to address his specific claims before they reach the public sphere. Your all-hands meeting this afternoon is the perfect venue to establish the factual baseline." There was a thoughtful pause. "Would you be willing to participate in that meeting? Your perspective as Aurora's representative would add considerable weight to the discussion." I glanced at Meridith, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I can be there. But I think we should also include Dr. Novak in the presentation. Her technical credibility regarding the patent issues will be essential in addressing one of Frost's key misrepresentations." "Agreed," Chambers said. "I'll make the arrangements and send you the meeting details." After ending the call, Meridith and I stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine. "You should go," she said decisively. "I'll head back to my office and handle things on my end. Caden will almost certainly try to contact my colleagues, possibly even show up in person again." "Are you sure you want to face that alone?" I asked, concerned. She smiled, a flash of her old confidence returning. "I'm not alone. I have Elise's team on standby, security alerted, and most importantly, I know exactly who I am and what I'm dealing with now. No more fog, no more manipulation." I hugged her briefly, then watched her stride purposefully toward her car, head high, shoulders squared. Whatever happened next, Meridith had reclaimed her sense of self, perhaps the most important victory in this entire situation. The Vertex all-hands meeting was conducted virtually, given the short notice. I joined from a conference room at Aurora's offices, with key members of my team present for support. Chambers began with a straightforward explanation of the situation: Aurora, Capital's acquisition offer, the board's decision to accept, and most importantly, the underlying reasons for both. "Vertex faces significant challenges that have not been adequately communicated to all staff," he acknowledged. "The patent disputes surrounding our core technology have created legal and operational hurdles that threaten our ability to deliver on client commitments. Aurora's acquisition provides the financial stability and legal resources needed to address these challenges effectively." He then addressed Caden's email directly. "Mr. Frost's characterization of events is fundamentally inaccurate. His suspension, pending ethics review, was not related to his position on the acquisition, but rather to documented instances of improper disclosure practices and conflict of interest violations." Dr. Novak spoke next, providing a technical overview of the patent disputes that had been concealed from many staff members. Her clear, fact-based presentation stripped away any remaining illusions about the company's supposedly unassailable market position. When my turn came, I focused on Aurora's vision for Vertex's future. "We invested in this company because we believe in its fundamental technology and the expertise of its team. The current challenges are significant but solvable, with proper leadership and resources. Our goal is not to dismantle what you've built, but to strengthen it by addressing the underlying issues that have been ignored for too long." The question and answer session that followed was tense but productive. Staff members asked pointed questions about job security, project continuity, and leadership transitions. We answered each honestly, acknowledging uncertainties where they existed while emphasizing our commitment to preserving and enhancing Vertex's core strengths. By the meeting's end, the mood had shifted noticeably. While concerns remained, the atmosphere of panic that Caden's email had triggered had been replaced by cautious pragmatism. Most importantly, the factual foundation had been firmly established before his narrative could take root more widely. As the virtual meeting concluded, Chambers sent me a private message. "Frost's attorney just delivered a settlement demand. They're requesting a severance package of $5 million plus retention of his stock options in exchange for his silence on what they're calling ethical lapses in Aurora's acquisition process. I forwarded the message to Elise immediately, adding, "Classic extortion attempt. Let's proceed with our planned response." Within the hour, Elise had prepared our official position. Aurora would honor the standard executive severance as outlined in Caden's employment contract, approximately $1, $2 million. Any additional demands would be met with a full public disclosure of the documented ethics violations that led to his suspension, complete with supporting evidence. "It's essentially calling his bluff," Elise explained during our follow-up call. "If he pushes forward with public accusations, we'll be forced to defend ourselves by revealing information he'd likely prefer remain private." "And if he accepts the standard severance?" I asked. "Then he signs a standard non-disparagement agreement, and we all move forward without further drama. It's the cleanest resolution for everyone involved." Chambers delivered our position to Caden's attorney that same afternoon. The response came the following morning, a blustering email threatening immediate legal action and a coordinated media campaign to expose Aurora's predatory practices. Elise's team was prepared. Within hours of receiving the threat, they had compiled a comprehensive information package detailing every ethical violation, every misrepresentation, and every conflict of interest incident documented during Caden's tenure at Vertex. This package was ready for distribution to specific journalists who specialized in corporate governance and business ethics, accompanied by an offer of exclusive interviews with Vertex staff members directly affected by the issues. "We're not distributing this yet," Elise clarified during our strategy call. "But Blackwell needs to understand that if he initiates a media battle, we're prepared to respond with overwhelming factual evidence that will not only vindicate Aurora, but potentially expose his client to further professional damage." Chambers conveyed this readiness directly to Blackwell during their next conversation. By that evening, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Blackwell requested a private meeting to discuss reasonable accommodation for all parties' interests. The meeting took place at Harrington's offices the following morning. I attended alongside Elise, while Chambers represented Vertex's interests. Blackwell arrived alone, a telling absence of his client that suggested the attorney himself recognized the weakness of their position. "My client feels strongly that his contributions to Vertex have been undervalued in the current severance discussions," Blackwell began, his tone already more conciliatory than his previous communications. "Your client's contributions have been appropriately recognized in his compensation to date," Elise replied evenly. "The standard executive severance package reflects the company's established policies for departing leadership. Given the unique circumstances, we believe some accommodation beyond standard policy would be appropriate," Blackwell persisted, though with noticeably less conviction. "What unique circumstances would those be?" I asked directly. "The documented ethics violations, the misrepresentations to the board, the attempted leverage of personal relationships for financial gain? Which of these circumstances warrants special accommodation?" Blackwell adjusted his tie uncomfortably. "Ms. Reeves, we're attempting to find an amicable resolution that allows all parties to move forward with dignity and tact." "Dignity is preserved through honest dealing," I replied. "Your client has already violated company policy, securities regulations, and basic ethical standards. The generous offer currently on the table provides financial security while requiring only what should have been provided all along, honesty and discretion." The negotiation continued for another hour, gradually shifting from demands to concessions. By its conclusion, Blackwell had accepted the original severance offer with a single modification: accelerated vesting of a portion of Caden's stock options worth approximately $300,000 at current valuation. A small price to pay for a clean resolution, Elise noted as we reviewed the final terms. "Agreed," I nodded. "Though I suspect this isn't truly the end of it. Caden's resentment won't disappear with a settlement agreement. Perhaps not, she acknowledged. But his ability to act on that resentment will be severely constrained by the non-disparagement and confidentiality provisions. Any violation would trigger immediate legal consequences and termination of remaining benefits. I signed the agreement with mixed emotions, satisfaction at resolving the business aspects efficiently, but lingering concern about the personal dimensions. Caden had targeted not just my business interests, but my daughter, attempting to manipulate her life trajectory for his own advancement. Such behavior rarely changes with a single setback. My concerns proved prescient. 3 days after the settlement was finalized, Meridith called me, her voice tight with controlled anger. He sent me a letter, handwritten, delivered to my personal address, not my office. What did it say? I asked, immediately alert. It's mostly rambling justifications, how everything he did was for our future, how he was trying to protect me from making career mistakes. But there's an underlying threat, too. Suggestions that he knows things about Aurora's questionable business practices that would devastate me if they became public. Empty threats, I assured her. Aurora's operations have been exhaustively vetted by regulatory bodies and independent auditors. There's nothing to find because there's nothing to hide. I know that, she said firmly. But it shows he's still fixated, still trying to manipulate through fear and innuendo. The settlement agreement hasn't changed his fundamental nature. No, I agreed. It wouldn't. But it has limited his options for causing tangible harm. Should I respond? She asked. Part of me wants to set the record straight, make it absolutely clear that his distorted perspective holds no power over me anymore. I considered the question carefully. What would that accomplish? Would it change his perspective, or simply provide him with the engagement he's seeking? She was quiet for a moment. You're right. Responding would just validate his approach, give him exactly what he wants, continued influence over my emotional state. The most powerful response is living well, I reminded her gently. Moving forward with the life and career you choose, not the one he tried to shape for you. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Aurora's acquisition of Vertex proceeded as planned, with the transition team addressing the patent disputes as a top priority. Dr. Novak was promoted to Chief Technology Officer, her technical expertise and ethical leadership recognized as essential to the company's future direction. Meridith received no further communications from Kaiden, who had reportedly accepted a position with a smaller firm in a different city, a significant step down from his previous role, but a fresh start away from the shadow of his failures at Vertex. 1 month after the acquisition was finalized, Meridith and I met for dinner at Harborview Bistro, the same restaurant where I had first begun to unravel Caden's deceptions. The familiar setting highlighted how much had changed in such a short time. I've been thinking about what's next, Meridith said as we settled into our favorite corner table. Professionally, I mean. Oh. I kept my tone casual, though her thoughtful expression suggested something significant was coming. I've received an offer to lead a major sustainable design project in Singapore, a complete overhaul of Andatsi aging business district using cutting-edge conservation technology. It would be at least a 2-year commitment. That sounds like an incredible opportunity, I said sincerely. Exactly the kind of project you've always been passionate about. It is, she agreed, a spark of enthusiasm lighting her eyes. The scale is unlike anything I've tackled before, and the environmental impact would be substantial if we get it right. When would you need to decide? They've given me 2 weeks. She hesitated, then added, I'm also considering another option, one closer to home. I waited, allowing her to continue at her own pace. Meridian Capital, she said finally. Dad's investment firm that he named for me. I've been researching it, learning about its focus on sustainable technology, investments. There's meaningful work to be done there too, directing capital toward innovations that could fundamentally change how we interact with our environment. I carefully maintained a neutral expression, not wanting to influence what was clearly a deeply personal decision. Both paths have merit. The question is, which one speaks most directly to your vision for your own future? She smiled, recognizing my deliberate non-directive approach. You're not going to make this easy by telling me what you think I should do, are you? Would you want me to? I asked simply. No, she admitted. I need to make this decision. Based on my own priorities, not anyone else's expectations, even well-intentioned ones. Exactly. I reached across the table to squeeze her hand briefly. Whatever you choose, you'll have my full support. The only wrong choice would be one made to please someone else rather than to honor your own path. As our dinner progressed, we talked of other things, books we'd read recently, a documentary series Meridith had discovered, plans for the upcoming holiday season. The question of her professional future remained open, a decision she would make in her own time, on her own terms. Walking back to our cars afterward, the evening air crisp with early autumn, Meridith paused beneath a streetlight. You know, what the most important lesson has been in all this? She asked thoughtfully. What's that? Understanding the difference between someone who appears to value you and someone who truly does. She looked up at the emerging stars, her profile strong and certain in the gentle light. Value isn't about words or gestures or promises. It's about respect for your autonomy, your intelligence, your right to define your own path. I nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges might lie ahead, Meridith had gained the most important kind of financial literacy, not just understanding the value of money, but recognizing her own intrinsic worth beyond any external measure. It was a lesson worth far more than all the investment portfolios and business acquisitions in the world. As we said our goodbyes, she hugged me tightly, then stepped back with a mischievous smile. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, that vintage Cartier watch you wore to the board meeting, was that just another calculated choice to play against type? I laughed, glancing down at my wrist where a simple digital fitness tracker now sat. Let's just say I've learned that people tend to see what they expect to see. Sometimes the most powerful position is the one where you're underestimated. A lesson I won't soon forget, she promised, her eyes bright with renewed confidence. Driving home afterward, I reflected on the journey we'd navigated together. The true victory wasn't in outmaneuvering Caden or securing control of Vertex, satisfying though those outcomes were. It was in watching my daughter reclaim her power, her voice, her self-determination, the very qualities that had made her a target for manipulation now serving as her strongest shields against it. Financial literacy, in its deepest sense, isn't merely about understanding markets and investments. It's about recognizing value in all its forms, including the immeasurable worth of integrity, authentic connection, and the courage to stand firmly in your own truth, even when others attempt to diminish it for their gain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.